Sur le programme 2030, l'impact de la
COVID-19 on SDG implementation in Western Asia and the role of parliaments. First and foremost, I would like to give you some organizational points and points that are related to the electronic platform that we are using today. You might use the interpretation language. You can pick it out from the bottom of the screen in case you wish to change the language. It's better to mute the original language and then select the language interpretation. The language for this meeting is Arabic. The majority of speakers will be using the Arabic language. However, simultaneous interpretation is present from and to English and French. We kindly ask you to keep your microphones on mute, except when you wish to speak in order to guarantee a good quality of voice. If you like to speak, please raise your hand by clicking on the list of participants at the bottom of the screen and choose raise hand. We would also like you to choose or to fill out your name and the title, and you can also use the mouse and rename in order to better facilitate communication. I would like to thank you all, and now I yield the floor to Dr. Rula Dashti, the Executive Secretary of ESCWA. The floor is yours. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Your Excellencies, members of parliaments and Shura councils, dear colleagues, dear assembly. Allow me first and foremost to welcome you at the Arab Regional Parliamentary Forum on the 2030 agenda for the Arab region, which is the fruit of cooperation and partnership with the Inter-Parliamentary Union and UNDP, as well as the Development Islamic Bank. We meet today in a virtual way in light of exceptional circumstances in order to discuss the consequences of COVID-19 pandemic on the achievement of sustainable development goals and the role of parliaments. Ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic has unleashed an array of consequences in the Arab region, knowing that poverty has increased by 14 million persons in the Arab region, and around 15 million persons have lost their jobs. And economic recession has also reached 33%, and it has become difficult to have access to education and health services. Therefore, the pandemic has showcased many dangerous gaps within countries, societies, and institutions, which raised many questions on the importance of reforms and required laws in order to counter the pandemic and other crises. We undeniably know the importance of your role and the role of your parliamentarian colleagues in enacting legislations and applying laws to put a halt to the pandemic and also to put a halt to its fallout on the society, and most importantly to protect the most vulnerable groups and also protect the small and medium enterprises. We also know the importance of your role in consecrating the role of persons and rights in our region. Ladies and gentlemen, despite the fact that the Arab region has achieved a lot of milestones towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals before the pandemic, it was not on the right path, however, to achieve these SDGs by 2030. Therefore, we call upon you at ESCWA to call for a new path with simultaneous joint partnership in order to have sustainable development for the future generations. Ladies and gentlemen, we stand today before a great opportunity to build better in a better way in order to have good bases and foundations by benefiting from lessons learned. Therefore, through our forum today, we will be establishing a platform to exchange a communication on the best way to advance, to achieve SDGs, and also to set recommendations to bring about a wind of change in this region. We hope that the forum will have a forward-looking vision on the role of parliamentarians in order to establish a healthier response to the pandemic towards achieving SDGs. Finally, I would have loved that this communication would have been held at the UN House premises in Beirut, and awaiting to see you in better circumstances. I would like to extend my deepest thanks to our partners for organizing this forum, and I would like to wish you all success in your dealings. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dashti. Now, I would like to yield the floor to Mr. Martin Chongong, the Secretary General of the Inter-Parliamentary Union. The floor is yours, Mr. Martin.
Ceremonies, it gives me a great pleasure to be part of this event today, and I would like to thank our co-host, the Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Western Asia, Dr. Dashti. I recognize the presence of Mr. Shafi from UNDP and Mr. Ahmad from the Islamic Development Bank. Of course, we're here today because of the role that parliaments and parliamentarians should play in the context of COVID and its aftermath. And I want to recognize and thank the parliamentarians who have found time to join us today for this event. I would like to start by thanking our partners. Therefore, on behalf of the IPU, I am heartened to see that our cooperation is being intensified, and I hope that this seminar will not, or webinar as we call it these days, will be another springboard for us to take more resolute action in partnership towards the resolution of the many crises facing all of us today. I think, Madam Executive Secretary, you have alluded to the impact of COVID, how COVID is hampering or even reversing the gains achieved in a number of areas concerning the SDGs. And we have seen also that there is an exacerbation of inequalities and structural imbalances in society as a whole as a result of COVID. So we can safely say that today more than ever, more resolute action is needed to step up efforts towards the realization of the SDGs. I think that to contain the spread of the pandemic and alleviate its impact on at the economic, social, and environmental levels, it is crucial that countries implement well-directed and well-resourced responses that are aligned with the SDGs. Governments are responsible for the implementation of the SDGs, but they cannot do this alone. There should be a partnership with other stakeholders, and I want to offer that parliaments and parliamentarians should be at the center of this effort. They should make use of their legislative, oversight, and budgetary responsibilities and play a key role in improving, for instance, universal health coverage for all the people. They can use these powers to combat inequalities and build more peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. We also want to stress the important role that parliaments play in terms of oversight and ensuring accountability for the use of resources, including resources that come from aid. To achieve the SDGs, the quantity and quality of resources available and effective spending must be increased, and development partnerships must be reinforced. To this end, to strengthen the role of parliaments in this area, IPU and UNDP recently published a set of guidelines for enhancing the engagement and contribution of parliaments to effective development cooperation. These guidelines provide an overview of the main elements of effective development cooperation and identify concrete ways in which parliamentarians can ensure resources and partnerships are used in the most effective way possible. As countries are now resetting their priorities and reallocating resources to deal with the pandemic, Parliament should be in a position to influence policies and budgets to ensure that the COVID-19 pandemic responses and recovery strategies incorporate the SDG framework in its entirety. Parliaments should monitor policy implementation and ensure that the needs and concerns of the whole of society are given due consideration with no one left behind. Honorable members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, it is my hope that we will seize the opportunity of the platform being offered today to exchange views, share experiences, and formulate recommendations that will be beneficial to your parliaments, to your societies, and to the region as a whole. You will agree with me that going back to business as usual cannot be an option. Parliaments should be at the heart of the national and global response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I look forward to open, constructive debates and wish you a very successful event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Martin Changong. Now I would like to call upon Mr. Khalid Abdel Shafi, the Regional Hub Director of the Regional Bureau of Arab States of UNDP, to take the floor. Thank you very much. I would like to welcome you all, Your Excellencies, representatives of parliaments, parliamentarians, representatives of Shura councils. Allow me first and foremost to extend our special greetings to Dr. Rila Dashti, the Executive Secretary of ESCWA, our dear friend, and to Mr. Martin Chongong, the Secretary General of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, and to Mr. Rami Ahmed, the Special Envoy on SDGs at the IsDB. I recall that we have previously met face-to-face at the UN House premises in Beirut before the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we have then talked about the major consequences that the Arab world faces on the level of human development and achievement of the SDGs. At the time, we had spoken of major challenges that our Arab countries are coming against and the major difficulties that might hamper our development, knowing that the majority of the Arab countries were not exactly on the path of achieving the SDGs, as Dr. Rila has mentioned in her opening statement. Of course, we know the fallouts of the crises that impact the Arab countries and might impact the development. We have recently published a study on Yemen, whereby we have concluded that 5 years of conflict have led to the regression of human progress to 50 years back. We know that many crises hit the Arab countries today, and we mostly know the political conflicts that undermine any development, and therefore ending these crises should be the top of our priority should we want to achieve the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. And now the COVID-19 pandemic has even made things worse. It places us in front of other challenges. It has started as a health-related challenge, and now we are facing a social, economic, and development crisis due to the fallouts of this pandemic, which accompanied also a great rise in the oil prices due to the lower international demand. This lower demand has also impacted the situation in the oil-producing countries as well as other countries that highly benefit from the transfers that come from oil-producing countries. Therefore, without repeating what Dr. Dashti has already said on the primary indicators in relation to poverty, unemployment, violence against women, domestic violence, and so forth, I would like to say that according to the analysis of UNDP, and since adopting the Sustainable Development Indicator in the 1990s, we note that there is a regression by 6% in this indicator for the first time. And therefore, there is a great danger lurking ahead on this level. Many other impacts might also affect the vulnerable societies, such as women, children, the refugees, the incoming workers. And if we wish not to leave anyone behind as a main principle of the 2030 agenda, we have to give more attention to these categories. At UNDP, we believe that we are facing one last opportunity. We are in the last decade. We still have 10 more years to achieve the SDGs. As Mr. Chongong has said, we have to work in a different way than before. We have to set forth innovative solutions in order to liaise between rehabilitation and countering the pandemic and the Sustainable Development Goals. Ladies and gentlemen, you are the representatives of the people and the different segments of the people in your countries. Your populations are aspiring and are looking to you so that you can work on overseeing policies, on enacting legislations, budgets. Therefore, you have a great role to play, and may God help you. Finally, I would like to tell you that we are backing you. We are proud of our partnership with ESCWA and with the IsDB and IPU. We will be backing you. We will be assisting you to devise the best solutions for this crisis that we hope will end soon. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Khaled Abdeshafi from UNDP. One final opening remark by Mr. Rami Ahmed, Special Envoy on Sustainable Development Goals of IsDB. The floor is yours. Thank you, Mrs. Maisa, Your Excellencies, representatives of parliaments, Shura councils, Dr. Rila Dashti, Executive Secretary of ESCWA, Mr. Martin Chongong, Secretary General of IPU, dear colleague, Mr. Khaled Abdel Shafi, Regional Hub Director of the Regional Bureau of Arab States, UNDP. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of IsDB, it is a great pleasure to welcome you all in these difficult times to this Parliamentary Forum on SDGs, which is held for the third time in cooperation with ESCWA, IPU, UNDP, and IsDB. First and foremost, it is a great pleasure to convey the greetings of Dr. Badr Haddad, the president of IsDB. He is also a former parliamentarian and vice president of the Shura Council at the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia previously. He wishes you great success in this forum and in your efforts in general in supporting and in backing the economic rehabilitation in your countries. Dear parliamentarians who represent the populations, their concerns, their fears, their hopes within the 2030 Agenda and SDGs, mostly know the importance of the human being who is at the core of these SDGs without leaving anyone behind. Because we know that development has many aspects, environmental, social, economic, and so forth. We all know that many Arab parliamentarians have already participated to the detailed discussions that led to the birth of the 2030 Agenda, which was approved by all members 5 years ago. The agenda has also ascertained the important role of parliamentarians on many levels. For example, paragraph 45, which clearly stipulates on recognizing the major role that the Arab parliaments are playing by enacting legislations, adopting budgets, and the role also in overseeing the effectiveness of all of the policies. If parliaments wish to play an effective role, we must build the capacities of parliamentarians, because parliamentarians must know how to strengthen their capacities, and therefore the IsDB with all its partners is mostly glad to support parliaments in building capacities and exchanging views with all the parliaments and mostly the Arab parliaments. Indeed, some guidelines have been published for parliamentarians in order to provide technical assistance through the mechanism of exchanging expertise and knowledge with the cooperation of many international organizations such as ESCWA and IPU, as well as IDB. Finally, in light of the difficult circumstances represented by the COVID-19 pandemic and other crises, we hope that Your Excellencies will shy away from the diplomatic honey talk and really delve into the problems and know how to achieve the sustainable development goals, and also exchange your successful experiences. We hope that we will not avert raising some important questions. For example, is development indeed an important cornerstone of the role of the Arab parliamentarians? What are the obstacles? What are the impediments? How can the parliamentarians overcome these difficulties? Do Arab parliaments have the capacity to constructively criticize the budget, the policies, the legislations that are put forth, as well as many other questions that must be asked? And I hope that all the Arab parliamentarians are up to the level to raising these questions. And I am confident that all the Arab parliamentarians present with us here today are willing to take up this task. Once again, I would like to extend my thanks to the organizers, to the partners of this very important forum. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Mr. Rami Ahmed. I would like to thank all the partners. And now we move directly to the first session, which is the scene setting session, with the facilitator, Mr. Hassan Krayem, Governor's Advisor at UNDP. Mr. Krayem, the floor is yours. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Allow me first and foremost to set the scene for the scene setting session and to introduce the speakers that will indeed set the scene for rich discussions. We have Mrs. Maysa Youssef,
وستتقدم
who
بعرض
is the
تقرير
ASDR lead
2020
author. She will give us the light on the Arab Sustainable Development Report
راصدا
2020,
للأوضاع الراهنة في
which will
المنطقة
shed the light on the
ورافدا
situation,
للتقدم
the status quo in the Arab
بمسار
countries,
تنفيذ خطة
and also
التنمية
the development in
2030
achieving the 2030
وأهدافها
agenda
17
and
مقتطع
the 17 goals, of course.
ثم ننتقل إلى السيدة سارة
Then we
سلمان
give the floor to
وهي
Mrs. Sarah
مستشارة في شؤون
Salman,
السكان
Regional
في
Advisor
إسكوا
on Population Affairs at ESCWA.
وتتعرض
She
لدور
will
البرلمانات
be
في
speaking
مواجهة
of the role
الأزمات
of parliaments in crisis
وتطرح
response.
الكثير من
She
الأسئلة
will also raise an array of questions.
كذلك الأمثلة كيف واجهت
She will also give a lot of examples how parliaments have faced crises, what are their experiences in this field, what are the difficulties, opportunities, impediments, and how can the Arab parliaments improve the opportunities of facing up to crises and lessening their fallout. One last speech by the Speaker Avinash Sharifa that represents the Center for Innovation in Parliament within the IPU and is a project officer. The main theme will be on regional global findings of the survey on Parliament's response to crisis through the statistical surveys that are periodically undertaken. Results will be showcased and the main challenges will also be delved into. Without any further ado, I will move directly to the first presentation. Every presentation will have an allotted time of 5 minutes. We have a tight schedule. Therefore, I hope that every speaker will abide by the allocated time. And please do not take it personally if I intervene to cut your presentation short should you overcome the 5 minutes. Now we give the floor to Mrs. Maisa Youssef.
Thank you so much, Hassan. Good morning again, and I am glad to introduce this scene settings through the key findings of the Arab Sustainable Development Report 2020 and how they are linked with the consequences of the coronavirus pandemic in the Arab region. This is a regional report with the 14 Arab countries that have contributed to it. They look at different SDGs in the Arab countries, and they give a quantitative and qualitative analysis of the different factors and different impediments of in the Arab world. We know that in the Arab world we have different natural resources. However, our region is still lagging behind other countries, such as in the women's participation in politics, unemployment, the use of renewable resources. And the report concludes that there shall not be any sustainable development without a change and reform and a transformative change in the policies that we adopt, especially and our report also monitors the data, which was very important when it comes to crisis monitoring and how to alleviate them. The idea of not leaving anyone behind is tightly linked to equality, to justice, and it reflects on more detailed data according to age and income and ethnicity and geographical location. Also, categorization of data in our region is political. It is not only technical. So in the report, we have 6 different entries, and we can see them clearly now, and they become more important under the COVID-19 pandemic. The first one is how to reinforce integrated policies. The third one, for example, is healthy. Excuse me, if we look at the third SDG, for example, which is health, or the second SDG, we notice that they are not well entrenched in the Arab world. There are different agencies and different categories and different parties working on the same idea or neglecting the same factor, which means that there are marginalized categories like women, for example, or children who are not being covered by anyone. The same for unemployment. We noticed that the Arab region has the highest rates of unemployment for women, for youth in the world. Also, when it comes to the transformation of the economy, the Arab economy towards productivity or production, we noticed that there was a saying or a certain cliche in our countries that says the youth are not able to cope with the different technologies. However, we in this report we noticed that it is the Arab countries, our states, that do not provide what it takes for the youth in order to adapt and to cope with the technologies, especially taking into consideration how fragile the Arab economy is in general. Also, the human rights state or condition in the Arab world that is quite weak and fragile too. We've noticed that many Arab countries are really not giving quite importance and not in reinforcing human rights issues. In fact, they are hurdling them and they are oppressing their people. This threatens the SDGs in general and the agenda of 2030. Occupation and crises and conflicts in the region, which also affect development now and in the future. 5, the education in our region that is still weak and fragile and doesn't give importance to the participation of the students. Also, the report notices or notes that the spending on research in the Arab world is 60% less than the international spending. Of course, there are discrepancies and differences between the Arab countries themselves. However, we also noticed that our efforts as Arab countries in the scientific fields, such as the vaccine creation, is still also very weak in comparison with the international efforts and on the international scene. At last but not least, and with the exacerbation of COVID-19 pandemic, there are international concerns that focusing only on procedures, on mobilizing resource, will have a very small and limited effect and will hamper the 2030 agenda, especially in the absence of real efforts to improve it, and that will exacerbate inequalities and instability. Therefore, the parliamentarians must urge their governments to work better on all these issues, especially in order to enforce justice and equality amongst everyone.
Okay, I was on mute. شكرا السيدة ميساء. سنترك المداخلات لبعض عفوا النقاشات لما بعد المداخلات. ننتقل إلى المداخلة الثانية السيدة سارة سلمان حول دور البرلمانات. تفضلي سيدة
سارة regarding the parliamentary role. Thank you, Dr. Krayem. Good morning, everybody. We have heard in the intervention of our colleague Maisa to a quick presentation about the challenges a crisis facing our region. Economic, social, political, and security crises afflict most of our countries and threaten their capabilities to advance towards securing the well-being of the population and achieving sustainable development. In light of these complex and often interconnected crises that impose comprehensive, swift and effective responses on states, the question arises, what role parliamentarians have in preventing and responding to crises and recovering from their effects? In theory, Parliament is the primary representative of the people and the pillar of the democratic system, and it should have a fundamental role in the various stages of crisis, starting with checking and approving plans in place to avoid crisis prevention or crisis management and the response. and recovery. It is up to both parliaments to it is up to the parliaments to verify the stability of the legislation adopted with the needs of the people, or how much it is suitable, so suitability. So how should they do that? They should do that based on the fact that they are close to the people. They should do that based on the fact that they know what their people need. And we noticed that there are many parliamentarians that keep communicating with their people and ask them about their needs and their concerns. So this also gives us or reflects the developmental approach of the country to the crisis. The parliamentarians also must approve how the changes in spending take place, especially the spendings of donations and donations from foreign countries, in addition to enforcing transparency and combating corruption. They also need to be the monitors of how the whole system works. Parliaments have different mechanisms that help them achieve that, such as the general sessions and other committee sessions, in addition to hearing sessions that take in the that ask the different specialists about their opinion. And despite the fact that most parliaments do have these tools, they also face different challenges that hinder their role, especially in the crisis. For example, under COVID-19 pandemic, which is an economic, social, and even political crisis, as much as it is a health crisis, we notice that there are different needs here. First, the need to take quick action, which prompted many countries to give broader powers to the executive authority in exchange for the legislative authority, including powers to control spending. Also, setting restrictions on some civil rights, such as freedom of expression and movement. There are European countries such as Italy, Hungary, and other Arab countries such as Jordan, Egypt, and Tunisia declared a state of emergency. The experiences vary between the countries. For example, in Finland, the state of emergency was discussed in sessions of the Constitutional Parliamentary Committee, and it was only approved after due and thorough examination on the different strata of the population, knowing that such a state of emergency needs the approval of the parliament to be approved. So, however, in Lebanon, for example, the constitution gives the president of the republic the authority to take such measures. So they did take these measures, but it was not appropriate and it was not suitable with the needs of the people. So there we can ask the question, would it have been different if the parliament had more power? Among the other challenges parliamentarians faced was the difficulty to communicate with voters due to quarantine procedures and the danger of social mixing. So also, COVID-19 has impeded the parliamentary ability to play a more effective role. So the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us that we needed to find new ways of work, that we could find new ways to work, such as remote work, such as online working and webinars. We can take into consideration here the Tunisian parliament's experience, which has taken all the online and distant and remote working procedures in order to hold the sessions, the parliamentary sessions as usual. And there are, of course, other examples. Dear parliamentarians. Parliaments have a lot of a big and important role in all these crisis prevention, and we are
شكرا
looking forward
للسيدة
to hear
سارة.
more from you about your own
وختاما
experiences.
المداخلة
Thank you
الثالثة
very much,
مع
Mrs.
السيد
Sarah.
أفيناش
The
بيخا
third
مسؤول المشاريع في مركز
intervention
الإبداع
will
في
be with
البرلمانات في
Mr.
الاتحاد
Avinash
البرلماني
Bikha,
الدولي. فليتفضل.
Project Officer, Center for Innovation in Parliament, IPU. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning and to share some of the observations that we have been making that is at the Center for Innovation in Parliament, especially on how is the response of Parliament and especially what are the innovations that they have been introducing. I'm trying to skip. Yeah, I would like to share the following. I would like to explain what we have seen in terms of what is the response of the House of Parliaments during the pandemic. What are the innovation? What are the enablers, and also what are the challenges that parliaments have faced? What are the indicators of performance that we are seeing? Those are the first ones, and also what is the strategic outlook? With regard to the innovations, when we think of the period that is beyond the pandemic. So if we look at the response of the parliament, we can see that one of the first things that we have been seeing that is across parliaments around the world is that they had to review first, or if not, to adapt this legislative framework that is of their meetings in terms of looking at whether that it was constitutional or that it was legal, that parliaments were able to move into the virtual meeting space, and also whether there's the rules of procedure that they needed to be changed. And we can see that that for plenary sittings, the change was really that it was more needed, and that for committees that it was much more easier because of the strictness of the rules for committees. What we also saw is that once that the legal and that the procedural that the challenges that they were overcome, that the parliaments started to move into the introduction that is of the virtual meeting solutions for committees and also for plenaries. With the plenary session, there has been there's the added complexity that is of the introduction that is of the remote voting. So the number of parliaments that are having the plenary that is in virtual format, those are less. And looking at what are the enablers for innovation, definitely that is the availability that is of cloud-based or the cloud-based technologies. Over the past 5 years, we have seen that is in middle-income countries, low-income countries, that the availability that is of cloud-based technologies, such as the ones that you see there that are listed, that is much more easier that they can be deployed, meaning also that infrastructure investments that would be needed to provide this type of virtual meeting services. Those were not so high, and parliaments were able to swiftly implement that is the virtual meeting tools. Also, we are living in an age also where the national that the internet connectivity levels those are much higher. However, still, the inclusiveness for some of the MPs that are living in areas where internet connectivity is not so high. Because of this, we also saw the prevalence of the that's of the hybrid model. That's of the virtual meetings. The hybrid model being, where there's a number of MPs that are connecting from the home or from the home offices where internet connectivity is good, and where the other MPs that they do go to Parliament to make use, that is of the infrastructure that is available at Parliament. Some of the challenges, parliaments, those parliaments that had already in place, that's the basic building blocks, that is of digitalization. They have been able to operate, they have been able to overcome more easier this disruption. So having in place, for example, that there's IT security, that there's document management systems that can also be reached, that is from outside of Parliament, where there's the mobility for the members of parliaments, that they do have the devices and that they can connect to the systems of parliaments, and also that there's electronic voting in place in Parliament, which then could be made available that is in the remote meetings as well. Another challenge, or it's an enabler, also that's the readiness, that's a parliamentary leadership, both that's on the political and also that's on the administrative side, where we have seen the engagement of the parliamentary leaders with the IT director, for example. We do see that the level of innovation is always higher, and we have also seen.
Allow me just to tell you that the time is up,
yeah.
But I'll give you like a minute just to wrap up so we can have time for discussion.
Yeah.
Sorry for the intervention.
As for indicators of performance, we do have some interesting figures, that is from the Brazilian, from the Chamber of Deputies. There's not many parliaments, where we can see the data, but they have managed, in fact, to perform, that is at the same level as that is pre-pandemic. And what is also very interesting to see, that is the attendance, that's of MPs, where we can see that the attendance level that is in the digital, that's the virtual plenary sessions, that it has been higher, and also that the voting of the MPs that it has increased. So what are the strategic options, that is for the future? We do not need to see that if we go virtual, that it is a contingency strategy, but also that it can be an inclusive strategy, just as we saw with the numbers from the Brazilian Chamber of Deputy. Also, there is a possibility that there's the increase of transparency. Just mentioned the example that is of Tunisia, and also the case that we have in Morocco, that now also, that the committee meetings that they're also being broadcasted because it's easier to be broadcasted. We also see that MPs, because of the virtual meetings, they are able to spend more time also with the constituents, and also due to this increase of the digitalization, that parliaments are also able to, that they can lower the carbon footprint as well. So, thank you very much. These are the observations that we are pleased to share, and I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Avinash. I haven't received any questions or clarification or any interventions in the chat box. لم يصلني أسئلة منكم في صندوق
I didn't receive any question or intervention in the chat box.
بعض الدقائق
Even though we didn't, we have a few more minutes to discuss.
المفروض أن يتم رفع الأيدي، لكن
We were supposed to raise hands.
أستطيع أن أقول
But I think
إذا أراد
that
أحد منكم التكلم
I can safely
الآن
say that if any one of you has any intervention to make,
يفتح
just press
الميكروفون
unmute
يعني unmute ويتكلم
and speak
إذا سمحت.
directly into the microphone. Good morning.
تفضل سيد علي.
Morning, Mr. Ali. Go ahead. Thank you so much. The presentations were really important, and I would like to thank Mr. Rami for asking us to be sincere. Here in the region, we have been speaking about sustainable development for 20 years, but the question is, where are we now? Can you please introduce yourself, sir, because not everybody knows who you are. My name is Ali Sawi. I am a professor at Cairo University in political science, and I am interested in parliamentary development, and I had the luck to participate. I was lucky enough to participate in many of your activities regarding parliamentary activity in the Arab region. So the question was and remains, what should the parliaments do? However, we need to ask another question. How can parliamentarians do what they have to do? First, we need to put ourselves in the shoes of the parliamentarians, where we put ourselves in the same environment, political and cultural environment. Also, the bylaws of the parliaments, because in many cases, the bylaws of the parliaments are in fact a hinder or an impediment to the work of parliamentarians. We should deal with the problems separately. Also, we should focus on the fact that, or the idea that the economically weaker Arab countries are more eligible for sustainable development. However, more economically strong countries can sort of wait or can have more time. Also, when it comes to general policies, when we speak about the parliamentarian role, we're not speaking about any competition with the government or with the executive power. They must be complementary. It must not be a threat to the government. Also, we must have more enablers, like, for example, data availability, technical support for the parliamentarian, and also ask ourselves really, what is the parliament doing for sustainable development? For example, Dr. Sara was saying, can the parliamentarians all read the general budget? Because this is the key to the 17 SDGs. And finally, as I said, having support groups for the parliamentarians. Excuse me, but we are going to get into the details of the role of the parliaments later on in the next sessions. Therefore, if you have any urgent intervention, because we only have 2 minutes left, about the interventions that were presented or the presentations that were given in this session only. Otherwise, we're going to discuss all of this in the second or the following session.
دكتورة عناية تفضلي دكتورة عناية.
You would like to intervene?
بس
sure.
افتحي الميكروفون.
Go ahead, Dr. عناية. The floor is yours. Good morning. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the organizers, and I am quite pleased to see you, Dr. Hassan, after all this time. Just a very quick observation. I know that and voluntarily, and in many cases we feel that all these reports of the governments or the parliamentarians, you know, there is this efforts that are made by the governments in the report without really seeing any political affirmation or political will to do all this. on the basis of equality, comprehensive work, and so on. So I think that this is the real problem, that we don't have this culture in the parliaments. So I think that we can focus on that and base our technical discussion on this matter. This is because also this is not merely a technical discussion. It is a political discussion too. We need to see how we can mobilize our efforts. Should we start from the top of the pyramid, or should we start from the bottom of it? And how can we hold everyone accountable to this? So I think that this is one of the observations, because, and I'm speaking based on my experience with the ministry and with the public work. Thank you very much, Dr. عناية عز الدين.
أسئلة أخرى أو مداخلات أخرى أن أنتقل وبسرعة
I would like
لحفاظاً على الوقت
move
إلى الجلسة
now
الثانية
ولزميلي
السيد كرم وهو المستشار
and
الإقليمي
to my colleague Mr. Karam, Regional Advisor on Governance ESCWA, who is going to be the facilitator of the second session. And I would like to thank you very, very much for all your precious efforts. Thank you.
Good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies. I would like to welcome you here. It's a great honor to contribute to the workings of this paramount forum that is held at an opportune moment. I will be the facilitator of this session, and within this session, we will be moving from reports and presentations that we have just listened to in the opening session to the real life experience that is lived by the participating MPs. Now, we would like to look for answers to three main questions. What are the main challenges that you have faced? How have you overcome these challenges, according to which mechanisms, procedures, or legal and institutional frameworks? And the third question, going onwards, based on this experience, which reforms do you deem appropriate to be achieved or launched so that parliaments can play a more vital role in countering crises, moving from the pandemic that we are going through right now and its fallouts, as well as other crises. I will give the floor to whomever wishes to take the floor. I would like to kindly ask you not to speak for more than 3 minutes. And I will give you the floor once again if we have sufficient time, if you wish to delve into more details. Now I give the floor to Mr. Abdullah Salama from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Please introduce yourself very quickly, so that our colleagues will know who you are and what your titles are. Mr. Abdullah Salama from KSA, 3 minutes, please. In the name of God, all merciful. Firstly, I would like to wish you a good morning to you in Beirut, to participants, to organizers, because it is an opportune forum that is held at a very important time, and it is a strategic indicator to major issues that we have to deal with post-pandemic. As we all know, when the pandemic is international and is influencing economic development, we know that this has taken a very negative path in our countries and in West Asia countries. As for the role of parliaments in the light of pandemics, we know that they have to rely on the policies, procedures, and the autonomy of parliaments in enacting laws and legislations. As our colleagues have previously said, we know how all countries, whether advanced, industrial, or developing countries have tried to counter this pandemic in a way to serve the best interests of their population. We know indeed that we have to play a paramount role in light of the pandemic. Parliaments should play a vital role in this sense. We know that laws and legislation's enactment might require a lot of time. This could affect the level of achieving SDGs, the 17 goals of the 2030 agenda. As for the overseeing aspects, they have to see or to oversee what's happening within the societies, whether in the Arab region or internationally. We need to oversee what happened within the society, poverty indexes, unemployment, SMEs that were affected, which will all affect the level of competence and justice in these countries. What about the role of women participation in KSA? I believe the economic shifts that the countries going through the 2030 agenda has given women more opportunities and chances. You have also mentioned the presence of an important service infrastructure and an IT infrastructure. I am sure that oil producing countries boast of such infrastructure. Other Arab countries like Jordan also has such infrastructures, and we know that other countries are moving towards the development of such infrastructure. We know that the parliamentarian diplomacy is of paramount importance to the greater extent in order to enable and activate international agreements. Therefore, we have to be positive and optimistic. MPs should push towards the achievement of policies and legislations that will put the sustainable development on the right course. We know that planning comes before budget and spending in the majority of cases. Therefore, MPs should follow up on the plans per se, and mostly their implementation at a later stage. In reality, priorities might differ from one country to another, as we all know. Furthermore, the changes required to change the parliament should always be a priority dynamic. The reforms that are required stem from within these countries and their parliaments, and to what extent there is an interaction with these policies and legislations. Prerogatives given to MPs are important. Finally, I would like to wish you all success. I would like to indicate that there has been a great success in the KSA, and which was leading the G20, and it called for a comprehensive economic reform. We know that there were a lot of negative fallouts of the pandemic that affected not only the kingdom, but the whole countries, which affected the issues of social equity, social protection, employment, poverty. And we would like to thank you for providing us with the opportunity to speak today. And we hope that the political crises in the Arab countries will not hamper any cooperation at the level of this region. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Abdullah Salama. Now I yield the floor to Dr. Musanna Amin Nadir, MP in Iraq. 3 minutes, please. Do not exceed 3 minutes. As Mr. Salama said, you have to focus on the real life experience of your country and the future reforms that you are looking for in order to enhance the role of parliaments. Mr. Musanna. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank ESCWA and all the organizing partners. in order to enforce the role of parliaments and MPs to curb the effects of the pandemic, which has left negative levels of unemployment, poverty, negative health levels, which has negatively affected tourism, education, and so forth. In light of the crisis that we are going through in Iraq, we are also going through another crisis, which is the lower prices of oil. Therefore, we had to have a lot of credits, and we are in a dire situation. Through the parliament, we had to resolve this problematic through more than one solution, but we are facing many hindrances. I believe all parliaments in the world are going through these obstacles. Early on, we have created a crisis cell headed by the Speaker of the Parliament with the partnership of many other committees. And we have tried to lessen the gap between the constitutional and executive committees so that we will have a partnership in performance at the executive and legislative levels. However, like other parliaments in the world, we are going through many other problems in relation to meeting, first of all, because we didn't hold virtual meetings on the outset. And also this is in relation to the internal bylaws of parliaments, because the parliaments also have to deal with the legal quorum of presence of MPs for voting and other levels. Therefore, parliaments should go hand in hand with these crises. They should know how to deal with them. We have also tried to enact a law that hasn't been voted. We need to have a lot of amendments in relation to the crisis that we are facing that might hamper the complete quorum or to have the legal mechanism for the right vote, as well as other remotely done activities. We know that crises should be dealt with as contingencies. One speaker has said that some countries have resorted to a contingency law. Therefore, these crises are dealt with through the partnership between the legislative and the executive authorities or powers. However, finances are not sufficient, and there's a shock wave created by this crisis. For example, the education sector cannot overcome the consequences or may not be able to face up to this pandemic and might require a lot of time to be able to counter it. And these are the obstacles that we are trying to resolve, despite the great advancements at the online teaching level. And despite the fact that people are not used to be taught at home on screen. Therefore, there's great disruption at the educational level, health level, and economic level. As the reports have stated, this should be dealt with through the budget law towards more development and the better distribution of resources to different sectors. And as we mentioned, there is a lack of financial resources, and to one point they were almost rare and the government was unable to function. So what about using these resources for investment and so forth? Furthermore, we need to activate the overseeing process over the government, because governments that suffer from corruption benefit from overseeing to be put on the right track. Therefore, overseeing is paramount in this sense. We also need to amend some legislations that will allow more fluency in the governmental workings. We have suffered from many problems. We are still trying to find their solutions, and we hope that we will benefit from your solutions to devise our own. Thank you. Thank you for your valuable insights and how we can enhance the role of Parliament to counter the fallouts of a crisis. Now I give the floor to the MPs from Syria. The floor is yours. Good morning. Fatima Khamis, MP in Syria. I would like to thank the organizers of this forum. Undoubtedly, the COVID-19 pandemic has had its negative fallouts on the international community. However, there was a disparity between one country and another on the economic, social levels. We all know that Syria, before the terrorist war waged against it, was one of the countries that was on the right path towards sustainable development, especially in the fields of health and agriculture. But after 10 years of war that destroyed everything, how can we speak of sustainable development while we are under the burden of an economic blockade? And recently, we cannot even find medication in pharmacies. We cannot have any medical kits. The war has also destroyed our infrastructure, and we will require decades to rebuild this infrastructure. Factories producing enterprises suffer, and we hope that all parliaments in the world will stand with us against the terrorism that we have fought on their behalf and suffered from its consequences, to end the blockade so humanity will have its own humanitarian meaning, and so that the sustainable development will be a strategy that we can develop and implement with you. Thank you. Thank you for your valuable intervention that also gave one further dimension. We know that the challenges are not. I would like to mention one point. We as MPs have been negatively affected in general, but also we have positively affected our society thanks to some preventive measures that we have followed under the direction of the Speaker of the Parliament in cooperation with the civil society. We have also had many initiatives that benefited the society, especially on the economic level, notably in light of the situation that we suffer from. But the war against terror and lifting the blockade should be done very soon to help Syria. Thank you. You have really shed the lights on another dimension. We have spoken of internal challenges that could come in the form of disasters or health challenges, but also there's the war against terrorism, at a point of which parliaments play a very vital role. Now I give the floor to Mrs. Saida Bouali from the Parliament of Morocco. Good morning, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. In reality, I would like to indicate that the COVID-19 pandemic is one novel crisis. Therefore, it is a crisis that pushed the governments to innovate a series of initiatives and behaviors to overcome it. In Morocco, early on, there was a solidarity sense amongst all. There was the COVID-19 fund that was created. All citizens and moral and physical personalities partook to this fund, which had a great impact. As for the parliamentarian work, COVID-19 pandemic went hand in hand with the end of the first legislative mandate, but the work has continued continued throughout the whole period, and therefore there was no disruption of parliamentarian work. The first challenge was the contribution of MPs, because we had to work remotely according to a certain relative representation of the parliamentarian blocks. As for the legislative work, there was a primacy of governmental legislation through the budget and other related laws. There were also many draft laws without legal texts in relation to the social support and health insurance. Therefore, the pandemic has hastened the cycle of approving these draft laws. Furthermore, the Parliament has undertaken the creation of many committees, such as the Health Committee, the Employment Committee, the Family Committee, the Solidarity Committee, and Youth Committee. All of these committees have carried out work on two levels. First, overseeing works in order to evaluate all the phases that the work goes through in light of the pandemic, to shed the light on the difficulties and suggest solutions to overcome these difficulties. Moreover, these committees whose working was confidential, thanks to a text in the Constitution, have become more visible, and the citizens were able to learn what these committees are doing. On Monday, there will be a great level of participation to the workings of this committee, which has bolstered the confidence of the citizens in the Parliament's work. We also have the amendment of the finance law, which was voted on in December 2019, was built on a hypothesis that was overcome. Therefore, we had to amend the public finances law to cater for the novelty on the ground, especially in relation to the education sector, which has to deal with new electronic platforms to provide educational services. And this has caused many problematics for remote villages and areas that do not have a Wi-Fi coverage. This has also negatively affected the health services because the pandemic affected the structure and frameworks of the health sector, because the health coverage was negatively affected. And so through the Health Committee, headed by the Speaker of the House, has tried to establish visions to what could be done to counter this problem. The last impact was on the public budget. We are currently trying to study the draft law of the public finances for 2021. I can tell you that the discussions that were held had a main objective in supporting the sectors that suffered the most, i.e. the health sector. There is a relative increase in employment. There were new job opportunities in comparison to last year. So we are currently trying to look for unified of health support and health insurance coverage, as well as the social support, which were broken down into different sectors, which could hamper governance. Madam, you have exceeded the time, but what you have said is extremely important, as what the previous speakers have already mentioned. It is as important as what they said. What you said shed the lights on the vulnerable sectors and also shed the lights on the important role of the parliaments in enacting the legislations and fixing the budgets to reallocate the resources and give access to these resources, especially to the most remote and vulnerable sectors. Now, Dr. Inaya Azzetine from the Lebanese Parliament, the floor is yours. 3 minutes, please. Thank you. We are well aware that in Lebanon, even before the COVID-19 pandemic, we have been through a dire economic and political crisis, which was concomitant with the COVID-19 pandemic, and what happened in Lebanon has already disrupted the work of the parliament, and even closing the country because of the pandemic has also made the situation more dire. We have tried to have a certain infrastructure level or certain quorum to have online parliamentarian meetings, but in the absence of an infrastructure in the country, and because it's not possible to have a coverage in all Lebanese areas, and sometimes there was a danger for some MPs to use the online platforms, we were unable to have many meetings. Despite this fact, the parliament has held some sessions to establish or to open new budgets to counter health and education problems, and also to give some tax exemptions and provide new deadlines. But like many other parliaments, what I would like to say that if I only wanted to speak of health, what has the pandemic shown us in terms of gaps and lacuna on the level of the legislative and executive work? We noted that the concept of health impacts many other sectors, be it the environment, agriculture, industry, energy, air pollution, and also disasters such as the pandemic that we are going through. So this has all showed that there is no integration, and there's a partition on the different levels within the sectors and between the sectors and the governmental levels. If we take the health example, as a parliament, we would be legislating for the medical and paramedical services. But health was not at the core of all the other sectors that also contribute to providing a good health level and a good health welfare to citizens. So parliaments move from this operational level to another level where the legislative and institutional frameworks should be established for this participatory approach. There should be a policy set up. There should also be an overseeing, especially in light of crisis. There should be policy set up and a coordination between different sectors. Parliaments should start translating this concept, which lies at the core of the sustainable development process, through legislations, and should dictate many legislations that the government should apply. We have noted that many legislations that the parliaments have enacted are not entered into force. In order to complete this participatory approach and partnership on all levels, this is important. And most importantly, this concept should also be translated into a budget setting that should be in line with this executive or legislative level. For example, smoking is in relation to health, but the finance ministry should also play a role in preventing smoking through its own laws. So it's a participatory approach. Therefore, we need to move on to this new level. We need to determine the new directions of governments and established the institutional structures for overseeing and for the participatory approach amongst all sectors and within the sectors and at all governmental levels. Thank you. Thank you. You have also highlighted one complementary level to what has already been said. The importance of harmony and complementarity of public policies and the importance of institutionalizing some important legislations and transforming some vital sectors that are in relation to security from the procedural level to the institutional level and provide the necessary budget for that. Now I give the floor to Mr. Dia Eddin Al-Habri from Algeria. The floor is yours. May the peace of God be upon you all. It is great honor and pleasure to participate with you today at this forum on the 2030 agenda and SDGs in the Arab region. The COVID-19 pandemic has negatively affected, of course, these societies. But first, I would like to convey the greetings of the Speaker of the Algerian Parliament, who wishes you great success in this forum. We are meeting virtually today to discuss the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has turned everything inside out and has imposed on us new ways of thinking, new behaviors, to think possibilities, to think of the resources that we have that may not be up to par with the fallout of this pandemic. This pandemic has swept the planet by storm and threatens to sabotage all the economic development that has already been done. All the economic wins are in regression. Many challenges are facing the countries of the world. We are facing important challenges, and therefore it is very important to cling to the sustainable development process in light of the downturn that we are going through. Going onward, we will try to link between the SDGs and countering the fallout of the pandemic in order to always be on the path of sustainable development by establishing all the necessary reforms and provide all the opportunities to do so. In light of what the Arab Sustainable Development Report has stated and other reports for 2019 and 2020, Algeria has achieved great advancements and has also provided many indicators, especially in relation to the youth and to services provided to the citizens to improve their welfare and standards of living. So we have established institutional mechanisms and attracted the necessary investments. Algeria ranked first this year on two levels, on the African and the Arab level for the second year in a row in achieving the SDGs. and the analysis of which has proven that Algeria in general is always on the right path to achieving the SDGs by 2030. And in light of the circumstances of the pandemic, Algeria is trying to safeguard these wins by working with different associations and committees and sectors. In order to work on all health services and also maintain the economic development by taking all the prevention measures to counter the pandemic. Also, many mechanisms on the economic levels were taken in order to safeguard the development that we have reached. Therefore, we need to rearrange our priorities to be always on the path of sustainable development. We also have to provide educational and health services and provide food security. Therefore, as parliamentarians, we have to intensify the initiatives in this perspective and also motivate the governments to provide the harmonious financial budgets that go in hand with this exceptional circumstance and achieve the 2030 agenda. We have to be able to contribute through legislative procedures in order to establish a more viable economic model. And going onwards and to maintain the best interest of the citizens, the Algerian Parliament will be approving the budget of 2021, which is free of any additional burdens on the citizens and some tax exemptions. Furthermore, the support budget is always there to support the health services and food services. Any positive services that the citizens are witnessing are a consecration of SDGs, and therefore, within these difficult circumstances, we have to deal with the current data, and of course, we have to move away from any stable priorities. We have to be able to know how to shift our priorities to put the pandemic into reverse mode. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Diaeddine. This is only confirming our main direction, and hopefully this will be confirmed more and more, especially regarding the Parliament's seeking to provide food security and other kinds of security without any impeding or impending weights or other loads on the population, and trying to go on with the ascending or with the progress in sustainable development.
شكرا جزيلا سيدي الرئيس. وفي البداية أود أن أشكر الإسكوا على الحرص على تنظيم المنتدى البرلماني يعني الثالث في ظل هذه الظروف. ويعني أرى أن الجائحة قد سلطت الضوء على يعني ليس فقط الأنظمة الصحية ولكن أيضا البرلمانات لم أو يعني كان لديها صعوبة في التعامل بكفاءة مع إدارة الأزمات الطارئة، وهو ليس بالأمر السهل بشكل عام يعني. ولكن أستطيع أن يعني أو الإشارة إلى أن البرلمان المصري يعني كان سريع الاستجابة في تحويل آلية الأدوات الرقابية بشكل
de faire passer les mécanismes de contrôle en ligne À cet égard, les plateformes étaient disponibles, mais il fallait réagir rapidement pour passer à ces plateformes. Et je pense que l'un des avantages de cette pandémie a été de nous inciter à travailler de manière plus rapide pour passer sur ces plateformes. Et le résultat a été excellent. Par ailleurs, nous notons que pour ce qui est des réunions et du vote à distance, nous n'avons pas fait de progrès exceptionnel. Comme l'a dit M. Avinash dans sa présentation, cela supposait des amendements constitutionnels pour pouvoir tenir les réunions de plénière en réunion sous format virtuel. Cela s'applique également au vote à distance. Donc, jusqu'ici, cela ne s'est pas réalisé. Mais nous veillons à respecter les mesures de distanciation, à porter le masque, etc. Par contre, jusqu'ici, nous n'avons pas de mécanisme bien ancré et établi pour pouvoir tenir ces réunions en ligne. Les parlements ont cherché à mettre l'accent sur la pandémie, sur les législations susceptibles de mobiliser les ressources. Comme l'ont dit les collègues, je ne voudrais pas répéter ce qu'ils ont déjà dit, mais je voudrais poser une question. Au lendemain de cette pandémie, serons-nous dotés de mécanismes durables qui nous permettront de gérer les urgences en général, ou est-ce que demain, par exemple, si une crise venait à survenir, nous ne serons pas à même de la gérer de manière efficace? J'espère que nous pourrons conclure les meilleures pratiques à partir de ce forum pour savoir comment gérer de telles crises de manière efficace au sein de nos parlements. Merci, Madame Hala. Et en réponse à votre question, puisque nous allons clore cette séance, j'aimerais dire que l'objectif de ce forum parlementaire consiste à répondre à la question par laquelle vous avez conclu votre intervention, à savoir comment profiter des conditions actuelles, de la crise actuelle dans nos parlements, au niveau régional, mais aussi mondial, pour tirer les leçons afin d'institutionnaliser ces leçons tirées au niveau des législations, de l'infrastructure ou de la mise à disposition des ressources nécessaires pour faire face à de tels défis afin que les parlements puissent mieux gérer et régler les crises à l'avenir tout en minimisant leur impact négatif et leurs répercussions. Je vous remercie de ce débat riche. Je vous remercie de vos idées très intéressantes et précieuses que nous noterons également dans le rapport de ce forum. Une pause de 5 minutes et je vous prie de respecter ces 5 minutes et de revenir pour passer à la 3e séance qui portera sur le rôle des parlementaires dans la région arabe dans la réalisation des EDD en dépit de la pandémie de COVID-19. Merci et à tout à l'heure. Bienvenue à la troisième séance. Il s'agit d'un débat ouvert sur le rôle des parlements dans la réalisation des EDD en dépit de la COVID-19. Je ne vois pas beaucoup de participants. Apparemment, certains participants se sont retirés, malheureusement à cause de cette pause que nous avons prise, mais je vois que certains sont en train de se joindre de nouveau à nous. J'ai le plaisir, en fait, de modérer cette séance. Je suis Rami Ahmed, envoyé spécial pour les ODD et conseiller du président du groupe de la Banque de développement islamique. Parfois, j'essaie en fait de provoquer, mais positivement, les parlementaires pour les amener à répondre à certaines questions épineuses. Mais nul besoin de le faire aujourd'hui parce que nous vivons déjà dans des conditions assez difficiles, les conditions, la situation dans la région, les défis auxquels elle est confrontée. En fait, la situation était déjà très difficile bien avant la Covid. Que dire avec la Covid maintenant qui a fait déborder le vase? En fait, c'était la goutte qui a fait déborder le vase. Et vous avez sûrement remarqué, messieurs les parlementaires, mesdames, messieurs, au cours de la première séance et lors de la présentation du rapport de développement durable dans la région arabe pour 2020, que ce que nous avons réalisé n'est pas suffisant et que, grosso modo, la région arabe n'est pas sur la bonne voie pour
is not on the right track to achieving and implementing sustainable development, even though some countries do have more hope than others. And I really enjoyed the report of Dr. Sarah, I think, because she was inspired by hope while actually describing the situation as it is. It is something that the report was actually away from cliches. It was quite ambitious, but it was quite realistic too, and this is something necessary and demanded. With all the challenges of the Arab world, you are now talking to us and telling us about the SDGs, about the 2030 agenda. However, our vision has changed. We have something more urgent. Or people would say that. Our answer would be true. However, the importance of this agenda is that it would be a TOR for all the people working in this field in order to unify and streamline development efforts while taking into consideration the specialities or the particular factors of each country. Because this report is not for all. It is something to be referred to and to use it as we deem better. And each parliamentarian may have different priorities according to the reality of their countries. The purpose of this session is to hear from you what are your priorities, your most urgent priorities, and what are your experiences, what are your successful experiences that you would like to share, or even the failed experiences that you would like to share. Now, in order to direct and guide the discussions, I would like to ask you the following questions. First, what are the most pressing priorities and opportunities for parliamentary action in your country to achieve SDGs in the context of COVID-19 recovery? What changes are needed to strengthen the Parliament's role in achieving the SDGs in the context of crisis? 3, how can parliaments help turn the crisis into opportunity? So turn the crisis into opportunity to deliver on sustainable development. So the third question is only for the optimists, because talking about chances and the opportunities rather in this crisis is an optimist thinking. However, it doesn't undermine the brutality of the pandemic. However, I would like to address these optimists to see how we can turn the crisis into opportunity and how we can see the light in the midst of all this darkness. So first, I would like to open the discussion about these three questions. Let's be as objective as possible, and maybe we can come out with recommendations that may be submitted to the Arab Forum for Sustainable Development under your name and as parliamentarians. So before giving the floor to the parliamentarians, I would like to address Mr. Ali Sawi, who is a veteran in serving the Arab parliaments, and I think that he's already been and visited most of the Arab parliaments. So maybe, Dr. Ali, you can just break the ice for 2 or 3 minutes regarding the role of parliaments in achieving the SDGs despite the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you, Dr. Rami. Thank you very much. I'm quite honored. Actually, I have been waiting, and I'm still optimistic while waiting for an answer, an honest answer. It is not I'm not criticizing or anything, but I'm trying to put things into perspective. I think that we all agree that our objectives are clear, and they're clear for the parliamentarians too. So I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the parliamentarians. How can a parliamentarian, an MP, a member of the parliament to do what he has to do? Budget, budget, budget. Money is the most crucial factor, and executives always need a lot of money and a bit of oversight. However, we have seen throughout the world that parliamentarians always want to reduce spending and to give more oversight. So how can we do that? And how can we get to that chemistry between the parliament and the government so that they understand that what their work is not a competitive work and it's not really any kind of threat to the authority. There are three main important points that I have seen throughout my experience with the parliaments in the Arab world, whether when they are managing Corona or the other crisis. First, availability of information or data. How much information does this MP has? How much is he getting or receiving himself or to his group or his team? And how accurate are these information in order for him to objectively assess what the government is proposing? Also, the efficiency of the technical team. The technical team must provide the MP different alternatives, whether on the legislative side or on the oversight side. Also, how much can the parliament follow up on the execution of public policies ratified in the parliament as legislations? Because what we know is that the law is not the law that is applicated or implemented on the ground. It is the legislations, it is the bylaws, or whatever name we give to the executive or the executive part of the law. And they make or break that law. Let's say, for example, that the law has ratified a new change in education. It is up to the minister to execute that, to implement that. But can the parliament participate or get involved in that decision, in that law? Is there a way for the parliamentarians, or does the law allow them to get involved? As for COVID-19, I hope that this will not be a pretext where everybody is going to be said, you know, we couldn't do this because of COVID. We couldn't do the sustainable development because of COVID. So, especially that we know that people who are in need of sustainable development is actually the weak countries, not the stronger countries. So the question must not be what should it be like, but rather how should we implement that? The conclusion is that small details that provide for the MP the alternatives, the solutions, the nitty-gritty details, these are what it takes for the MP to succeed in his work. Let's be honest together. As you said, Mr. Rami, did the parliament, for example, does the parliament have a history of refusing or refuting legislation started or initiated by the government? Usually, no. If we have the same forum with the ministers, are the ministers going to say that the achievement made during Corona in education, in health, and so on, was it done because of the parliamentarian pressure, or was it done because this was the reality, this was how it just worked, and it was because the government did a great job? Basically, each one of the two parties is going to take credit. The idea is that what is important is how we can make both efforts streamlined in the same place. And we need also to understand the importance of spending of money. How can we oversee and how can we scrutinize spending in a way that ensures that this money is going towards sustainable development according to the needs of each country? In the agendas of each country, let's say Saudi Arabia, UAE, Algeria, so on. Let's say that each one of the countries has chosen a priority and is working on it. This is important and this is respected, of course. But who is funding that? It is the parliament according to its constitutional duty. So it is the power of the wallet, as we say. We need to support the parliament and not only assess the parliament. And I think that now we are moving from what the parliament should do to how can we support the parliament in its effort, especially in the financial side or perspective. Thank you very much for this important point regarding availability of information, supporting parliamentarians, also supporting their ability to research and to find solutions. And in order to find solutions or to support them, it's not only about making new legislations, but also how can we apply these legislations. Also, I would like to thank you for the word pretext, because it is true that the challenges that have that rose from COVID must not be used as a pretext for lagging behind in sustainable development. So, thank you. And we will take interventions from the participants. MP Talal from Saudi Arabia. Thank you very much, Dr. Rami, for this opportunity. And I was very pleased to be a part of this webinar and these rich discussions. I am not going to take much of your time, but you have mentioned many points that I think are quite important regarding sharing the success stories in Saudi Arabia. One of the most important things to be taken into consideration in addition to the financial side, I think that pre-planning for managing the crisis is very important. And it is not something that should be birthed by the crisis, for example, by the COVID-19 crisis. No, it is something that should be adopted by all the categories and all the departments of the state. It is something that should be done beforehand. We need to always have a crisis management plan beforehand, whether we're speaking about COVID-19 or any other crisis. The other point that may be a bit more general, but also related to crisis management, and it is also related to what Dr. Sawi has mentioned about the importance of the availability of information. And I think that this is something not related only to the financial resources, but rather about having a certain base or a platform to exchange information. The information that should be available for the parliamentarian, the right and correct information in order to follow up on the legislations and so on. And I think that this is something that could be applied easily. And because it only needs a bit of experience, and we do have these experiences and these capacities and capabilities. Because of course the MP is quite busy with a big agenda, and if we support him that way, then he will be more efficient in his work. As we said, whether we're speaking about the COVID-19 or any other crisis or issue, this is something that could be done easily. Of course, money is important, but setting up mechanisms and applying them or implementing them may have a positive impact. And at the end, I think it's also important for all the parties to have a comprehensive working plan and working system through relations, through policies, through agreements between the different sectors. And that would increase the efficiency of our work. And this is what I deem important and paramount. Therefore, I suggest that we do that in all the parliaments. I'm not speaking about right now, but in the post-corona period or era. So thank you very much for giving me this chance. Thank you so much, Mr. Talal, MP Talal. So this is pre-planning for crisis management. This is something that would be a wake-up call for everybody. And I think that this is the wake-up call that the pandemic has given us. It is of paramount importance, and we can submit that to the Arab Forum and how to make that a fixed clause on their agenda. So pre-planning for crisis management. Please raise your hands through the platform, through pressing on raise hand. So what I've seen now, I see now that the People's Council in Syria would like to take the floor. So
Sustainable
We are from the
Development
People's
for
Council.
2030, which is an international goal to end poverty and
Sustainable
guarantee
development,
peace
which
and
is a way
prosperity
to
for
prove
citizens.
and to ensure that everybody gets to live a good life.
This has rendered the achievement of SDGs by 2030 in danger. The People's Council in Syria has enacted law number 7 for 2007 on epidemics and how to prevent that. And after the COVID-19 pandemic, the council was overseeing the workings of the government to counter the pandemic. Indeed, the government has established a ministerial committee to counter the effects of COVID-19 and has taken the necessary measures in order to contain its spread under the oversight of the People's Council, and the latter has played a great role in defining the budget for education and health, and also increase resources in the budget to support the social assistance, which reached 6 billion Syrian liras to counter the effects of COVID-19. The entire world has suffered from COVID-19, but in Syria, we suffer from 3 types of coronavirus. Firstly, COVID-19, 2, the terrorism, and 3, the economic downturn. Terrorism has destroyed hospitals and health centers and stopped the economic cycle. The dire economic situation imposed on Syria, the blockade, has stopped the arrival of medicine for the Syrian people, which made the government and the People's Council incapable of catering these needs. And therefore, we call upon the conscience of all of you and the people to stand by the side of the Syrian people to lift the economic blockade in order to counter COVID-19 pandemic. And the blockade goes against all SDGs and international charters. And therefore, we need to combat COVID-19 and be on the path of SDGs. And therefore, this should be done through lifting the economic blockade. And this should be amongst the recommendations of this forum. Thank you. Thank you. We would like to thank you for being very straightforward and setting the Syrian panorama as it is. Thank you for mentioning these points. How can we speak of economic development and sustainable development in light of all these challenges? And therefore, we need to look into the root cause of the problem before really devising any solution. Now, Dr. Abdullah from Morocco, the floor is yours. Please respect the allotted time to allow as many speakers as possible to take the floor. Dr. Abdullah. All right, Ms. Saida from Morocco. Mr. Rama, I believe Dr. Abdullah is muted. Good morning. Abdullah Fouanour, President of the Finance and Economic Development Committee in the Parliament. It is a great opportunity to examine the COVID-19 pandemic, its fallouts, and its linkages to sustainable development. I would like to mention some facets in relation to evaluation, legislation, and the financial aspect. This pandemic, for the first time, hits the offer and demand perspective, and it moves from what is health related to finance related and other. Therefore, the world, at least since the last crisis in 1870 has never suffered from such a pandemic, and therefore in Morocco we deem this as an opportunity. It was indeed a great opportunity to take into account many facets in relation to the social level and the economic level. In terms of social level, we have had the social protection initiative, which does not exceed around 1,200,000. And on the other level, it reaches around 3.5 million. But if we speak of social protection, indeed, it started in 2016 with numerous initiatives, but this pandemic has pushed us all to think of social protection to cover around 22 million Moroccans that are without coverage. And therefore, the first procedure that was taken by the diverse committees. And here I would like to say that in terms of evaluation and assessment in Morocco, we have many tools, as is the case in many other Arab countries. We have the oral and verbal questions that must be answered and so forth. But we have two matters. Firstly, the Information Commission. During this pandemic, and Mrs. Mahali has already mentioned that despite the pandemic and during this pandemic, we wanted to go to explore a number of cases and to continue the implementation of some laws, and wanted to move away from the legislative text towards all its financial and other related aspects. And during the pandemic, the Finance Committee has held 2 meetings in April and in May, and we have established 2 reports, and the government try to implement the proposals up to 80%. We also have the other aspect, which is the creation of a special committee within the parliament in parallel to other committees in the Arab countries. We have this new committee of the finance oversight, and its role is to follow up on the implementation of programs and the public finances in general. Moreover, we also have the law that regulates the finances, and there will be a report that states what every ministerial department will undertake in terms of projects, in terms of activities and implementation. And so in this report, there will be a follow-up on what has been already implemented. We also have the liquidation law, which is a law on the implementation of the public finances and a budget for the year before. So the MPs will be able to follow up on the implementation of aspects. I still have 2 ideas, please. Dr. Abdullah, I wouldn't wish to interrupt you, but I realized that you are trying to answer the questions of Dr. Ali Assawi, and this is beneficial, but he was speaking of integrating the SDGs within policies. Thank you for your beautiful ideas in terms of follow-up, but have you succeeded in integrating SDGs within policies early on? Please, 1 minute. Early on, yes, but not as profoundly as we are speaking today. Of course, many meetings have been held on the theme of sustainable development with numerous committees that promulgated many reports. There was a lot of follow-up on the issue, but within policies, the laws that were enacted, maybe they were a bit in delay in comparison to the sustainable development deadline. There was also an opportunity in terms of financing in Morocco. I'm not saying there was a waste, but there was somewhat a lot of distribution of the public finances within the public sector run by the government and the private sector. We have more than 730 public institutions. So it was an opportunity within the pandemic to unify all of these institutions because they were costing a lot of money effectively. And one last opportunity, which is the last idea, is in relation to the private sector and contribution to development. For the first time, the private sector's contribution was high and its participation was through banks and guarantees provided by the government. Finally, though the pandemic is a crisis and entails many negative circumstances, but it was also a source of many opportunities in Morocco in this sense. Thank you. I really would like to thank you because you are optimistic and you speak of opportunities, while I said that we are somewhat pessimistic when we think of the pandemic. So how can we see the silver lining? This is the most crucial point, even if the COVID-19 pandemic is a huge problem, but the lacuna that were unveiled will help us more in better planning the future and managing the crises. Thank you. Now I give the floor to Mrs. Wafa Mustafa. Thank you, Mr. Karam. Allow me to introduce myself. I am the attorney Wafa Mustafa, former MP in Jordan and former vice president of the Sustainable Development Committee at the Parliamentarian at the IPU. I would like to thank IPU, ESCWA, and all the organizers for their kind invitation. Allow me first and foremost, and thanks to my 10-year experience in the field and being part of the Sustainable Development Committee at the IPU, to mention a couple of important points. Firstly, it is important to have governmental plans to which the MPs are a part in order to integrate SDGs into policies. And this is what we have done in Jordan, because the national committee that was formed to follow up on the implementation of SDGs had as the MPs as members from both chambers, the first chamber and the second chamber. This has largely contributed to integrating the legislative plans within the national plans, because the Sustainable Development Goals have a legislative important part. Secondly, to answer the question of Dr. Ali, and I was honored that he had visited Jordan for more than once. The coronavirus is not a pretext. There is a real downturn happening throughout the planet in implementing the 2030 agenda and the SDGs. There's a great challenge in achieving the goals that were addressed in 2015 by 2030. And this downturn, in my opinion, needs a new restructuring and a new vision of these goals, because some of the goals require more time to be implemented, and there should be subsequent assessment on the extent of the implementation of SDGs. Furthermore, we know that some goals require a lot of human and financial resources, And I believe that nowadays in the Arab world, we need to reorganize our priorities at a large extent. I believe that this pandemic has opened our eyes in the Arab world and the importance of repumping money in the private sector, in the educational sector, in the health sector, especially when it comes to online educational platforms, because we know that many Arab students are incapable of accessing online education. Finally, I would like to mention that it's important to activate the 17th goal of SDGs, because without international cooperation, without real partnerships, no single country can succeed single-handedly. We are all on a single boat in this ocean. Saying that some countries have survived and others are still stuck in this crisis will not be helpful. Everybody should pitch in financially and have budgets to achieve SDGs in all countries. Throughout the IPU's meetings that I have assisted to during the pandemic, there has always been an attention to the importance of cooperation, humanitarian cooperation amongst countries and within a single country. Thank you. Your point is very clear. I'm sure that my colleagues at ESCWA are jotting down very important points in terms of recommendations, especially by focusing on the 17th goal. I have really appreciated the issue that you mentioned, which is the remote education. A lot of people believe that remote education is easily accessible. In many Arab countries, especially in marginalized and vulnerable regions, the situation is otherwise on the ground because there's no Wi-Fi coverage and many other difficulties lie ahead. I would like to ask the future speakers to be as concise as possible, please. Dr. Abdullah Salama. Hello, thank you for giving me the opportunity to have a say. I wanted to reascertain what was mentioned in terms of disrupting all axes in relation to education and SDGs. We know that there are a lot of public and private institutions in the Arab world that are seeking to work on similar goals, and this is an opportunity to carry out oversight activities. When we receive annual reports, we need to scrutinize the work of such institutions, and we need to ask to delete anything that is redundant and recurrent within these different institutions in order to further facilitate our oversight and continuation of SDGs achievement. Furthermore, it's a great opportunity to focus on investment and polarizing investments in the health sector at a larger extent in the Arab world. Our doctors are in Europe and in other continents. Some are present here in the Arab world, but we need more of them to be back. So we need to think on how to bring them back. As for the commodities and services influxes and legislations that will guarantee that this influx will be really fluent to countries in crisis times, and this is of paramount importance and great opportunity to benefit from such an assistance. Thank you. So, three major important points: remove redundancy. This is an important role of oversight, and also focus on health services. So far, nobody has spoken of vaccines, by the way. I wouldn't want to put words in your mouth, but I would have hoped that some of you might delve into the vaccines issue. If any person has anything to say on parliamentarians playing a vital role in providing vaccines to their populations, because we know that there is a specific dynamic in the world nowadays in providing vaccines. As you know, the report has mentioned that in the Arab world, we do not have any scientific contributions in relation to innovation and so forth. And I believe we are on the margin in the Arab world. Maybe some speakers can really talk about this point. I see on the screen Dr. Azmi Shuaibi. He is also a man of great experience, and we hope that he will participate in the discussion. Now, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Hala from the Egyptian Parliament.
شكرا جزيلا سيد رامي يعني
أنا أود
الإشارة إلى نقطتين الحقيقة النقطة
I would
الأولى
like to draw your attention to 2 points, if I may. Firstly, the public budget of the state, and what Dr. Ali has spoken of. The MPs should have an efficient influence on the budget. Therefore, this should be a participatory approach at a medium and long-term level, and without any further ado, the budgets should be given to the Parliament to be approved, and also so that the MPs could somewhat influence its items. The Egyptian Parliament
فرعية منبثقة من لجنة
الموازنة secondary committee attached to the budget commission
التأكد من
to work
أن
on
الموازنة العامة للدولة
making sure that the public budget of the state caters for the sustainable development goals and links the budget to performance indicators that will achieve the SDGs. The committee is currently working in its third year.
يصبح نهائيا
حتى الآن ونعمل بشكل
يعني final nous travaillons de façon participative avec le gouvernement. Pour réaliser tout ceci, les parlementaires doivent savoir qu'il nous faut 3 à 5 ans minimum pour s'assurer que le budget général de l'État est en train de réaliser les objectifs de développement durable et pour faire le suivi de leur performance. Un point encore à soulever. Quelle est l'opportunité ou les opportunités qui se présentent durant cette pandémie pour réaliser les ODD? Moi, je pense qu'il y a beaucoup d'opportunités. Si l'on considère les 2 objectifs 13 et 14 concernant les changements climatiques et la meilleure utilisation des mers, etc., nous voyons qu'à l'ombre de la pandémie qui sévit depuis plus de 9 mois, donc ces 2 objectifs peuvent avoir été réalisés sans avoir pour autant travaillé réellement pour les réaliser. Nous, en tant que parlementaires, il faut s'assurer que lorsque nous travaillons sur diverses activités, nous devons nous assurer que ces activités vont mener à la réalisation des ODD. Nous sommes en train de travailler sur l'objectif lié à la santé. Donc, il faut braquer les phares sur la question de la protection sanitaire universelle, notamment pour les pays qui n'ont pas ce genre de protection. Cette pandémie a accéléré les bonnes pratiques sanitaires telles que le lavage fréquent des mains. Et ça, c'est l'un des objectifs de développement durable, par exemple. C'est inséré dans ces ODD. Cette pandémie a également poussé de l'avant l'agenda lié à la famille et a aidé à mettre en œuvre certaines des lois qui avaient été adoptées par le Parlement en 2008, mais qui n'ont pas été mises en pratique de façon effective. Donc, la pandémie a aidé à la réalisation de ces lois telles que interdire de fumer dans les endroits fermés. Et je pense que la pandémie a également poussé de l'avant le transfert vers le numérique de façon rapide. Et je pense que c'est chose positive. C'est une bonne opportunité afin de réaliser cet objectif qui est l'un des objectifs de développement durable. Un des collègues également a souligné la question de la protection sociale. Oui, madame, je vous remercie, docteur Hala. On pourrait entendre des commentaires sur ce que vous avez dit, notamment la protection universelle, le transfert vers le monde numérique, l'environnement qui s'améliore, etc. Donc, tous ces points-là ne sont pas dus à la pandémie parce que la pandémie a poussé plus de 100 000 personnes sous la ligne, sous la barre de la pauvreté. En ce qui concerne le lien des budgets avec les indicateurs, je pense que c'est un très bon travail fait par le Parlement égyptien et je pense que beaucoup de parlements ont fait un travail similaire. Je pense que nos collègues au Parlement marocain l'ont également fait. Mais ici, on revient au premier point qui a été mentionné par Dr Ali Al-Sawi, qui est à propos de la disponibilité des données. S'il n'y a pas de données, comment pouvons-nous être sûrs de ces indicateurs? Mais lier le budget aux indicateurs est chose très importante et c'est l'un des points qui pourrait être inséré dans les recommandations. Puisque nous avons mentionné le Maroc, nous donnons la parole maintenant à Madame Saïda du Maroc. Merci. Tout comme mes collègues, je parle également des entraves devant le Parlement lorsqu'il veut mettre en œuvre son travail. En effet, le Parlement a un potentiel d'experts et de consultants. Cependant, chaque groupe travaille selon ses capacités et le Parlement attend que ces capacités s'améliorent. En ce qui concerne l'intégration des ODD dans les stratégies, je pense que le Maroc a travaillé et il a œuvré sur la protection sociale. Il a considéré que l'éducation, le travail et l'éducation sont le devoir de l'État vers le citoyen. Il a élaboré des mécanismes au sein de la Constitution afin de rendre ces objectifs réels.
Donc, il y a le Conseil national des droits de l'homme et
nous avons chez nous le ministère de la solidarité et des personnes
du développement social.
Of cooperation and social security. Yesterday, we were reviewing the women's condition in now in the present, and we have noticed that the violence against women has increased 54%, and there were also at the level of the parliament, we had a thematic committee for equality, which is a committee that analyzes the different legislations and budget in order to assess how responsive it is and how much it meets with the equality between men and women. We have another thematic committee that is headed by the president of the chamber. Also related to sustainable development, we have a number of legislations that were ratified, including preventing and combating domestic violence and violence against women, and to address this kind of violence against women. In fact, COVID-19 pandemic has shed its weight on all the countries, and what we need is to turn this crisis into opportunity. In Morocco, more than 10 million households are in danger of falling into fragility or into poverty, and this can be prevented by improving employment mechanisms and improving also and working on the black market or the unofficial or economy. In Morocco, we have also the Mohammed VI Fund for Investment that aims at promoting work and employment and aims at supporting entrepreneurs. You need to be an entrepreneur in crisis and to be actually a member of the Cooperation and the Solidarity Fund in the first place. And therefore, you would be compensated for any losses you have been through. Can you please be brief, madam? So, personally, I think that we did start working, but there are different failures and weak points that led us astray from the correct path. It has also, and these impediments were revealed by two different institutions in Morocco, the superior or the higher council for audit and the socio-economic council that provided us with a plan for our socio-economic development plan. And now we can see that everybody in Morocco and all and both the private sector, the civil society and the public sector are working together hand in hand in order to improve the state and conditions of Morocco. And this is something very important. We need to be optimistic and we need to fight darkness with light. Very good, very good. This is something very important. And how to turn the crisis into opportunity. This is important. This is what we want. Actually, the report said that prior to COVID-19 pandemic, there were more than 26% of the youth unemployed in Morocco. So I think it got much worse now. And this is something that we should be working on, of course. We have 4 more speakers, and I think that we have already, we don't have much time anymore. If you don't have any problem, Mrs. Maisa, we can go on. Yes. Do you approve that? Yes. We have 4 speakers. Please, our dear speakers, we can start and then close immediately. We have Dr. Ainaya Azzeddin first and Mr. Ali Swairi. Dr. Ali Swairi. Yeah, half a minute, only half a minute. Dr. Ainaya, the floor is yours. Of course, in brief, I think that this crisis and the difficult consequences it had, I think that yes, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is an opportunity because all this downfall and this collapse in the health sector, the economic sector, and the socio-economic sector, this is something that led people to understand that what they were used to before is no longer valid. However, we need to build the factors as the parliamentarians, as the government members, and as society members, we need to keep telling people that working on sustainable development is a priority, and putting it on the legislative agenda. This is a priority because now we need to work on the post-corona period. This is not easy, especially in a country like Lebanon, where we have been fighting a political crisis. We've been going through a political crisis that's been going on for years and years. We don't have a government now, and whatever suggestion or draft we may suggest or submit cannot be ratified anyway. We should also convince the people that it is our duty, first and foremost, to try to set up the infrastructure and the institutional infrastructure in order to convince them that the way we had adopted before is not going to be transparent enough, is not going to be comprehensive enough, or is not going to achieve development. Because speaking about figures only is not effective, is not efficient, because figures cannot provide social justice and development. Also, it's very important. Of course, there's a lot to say, but most importantly, it is important to speak about the availability of information or data in order to set up policies based on objective figures and information according to each country's needs. And here comes the role of the legislation that allow for a digital change and transformation in our countries in a way that will be comprehensive to all the country, not only in certain departments or in certain institutions. Also, data sharing. In Lebanon, we have a huge problem with data sharing because each minister thinks that it is his own ministry. So that leads us to the discussion of who owns these policies. Is it the minister, is it the ministry, or is it the state as a whole that needs to provide the continuation and the follow-up for these policies? Also, we need to stress again and again the importance of battling and corruption and increasing transparency and implementing reform, because that only can give us the means to streamline comprehensiveness in all the sectors of services and services. Otherwise, the benefits of the work of the state is going to be going to some people and not to others. It is also important to give women their role and their space in everywhere and to really achieve equality. Constitutions speak about equality all the time, but it is not a reality, and it's not a reality on the ground, especially because of the cultures that where the that look like their religion, but in fact they're just culture and social practices. I'm sorry to interrupt. You were saying something important. You said there are legislations, but there is no application. So where's the problem? Where are the parliamentarians then? Oversight on the government. So how are you doing that oversight? No, actually, we don't have legislations. In the constitution, we have the idea or the concept is enshrined, but we don't have any laws and rules and legislations that guarantee equality for men and women. We've been working on that for 2 years, and now we are putting and setting up more strategies in order to make sure that women will have equal opportunities at home, in the community, and in the state. I realize that you don't have enough time, so thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we know that each country has its problems, it has its intricate problems. So you've been talking about your own problems in Lebanon, and if you minutes ago, our colleagues from Syria were discussing really serious problems and grave problems that are not easy to tackle. So you've been speaking about how to do the oversight, how to enact legislations. It is something that's actually common between Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and so on. And if we only speak about sustainable development without looking at the other factors, then it would be a bit, it wouldn't be enough. And I really pray to God that this situation changes, and and we are going, of course, to put these suggestions in the recommendations. We will move to Mr. Ali Swili. Thank you very much, from Morocco. Thank you very much for the organization of this forum at such a critical time, and at a time where we all need to combine our efforts in order to combat this pandemic. Dear colleagues and parliamentarians, in Morocco, we had different legislations and measures that we have been working according to in order to fight COVID-19. The Council of Advisors were working relentlessly and with more interest in order to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. We have modified bylaws in order to respond to certain instances. The line is breaking. Also through surveys, monthly surveys. We've been working through monthly surveys and we have also initiated initiatives, legislative initiatives. The COVID-19 pandemic has shed the light on the importance of the role of parliaments and of the state in fighting it, and has encouraged the states to work more to achieve the 17 SDGs. And in light of the fact that the higher chamber of advisors in Morocco and the complexity and the fact that it has different parties, we've been working relentlessly on equality among the sexes, on improving social justice, and other SDGs in cooperation with the Advisors Council. The line is breaking. We have also adopted the 2030 agenda as one of the TORs or references to carry out our own plans. We have also considered which is the 2030 agenda, as a basis for a number of our documents that aim at implementing social justice. We have also organized different national and international forums most importantly, the Parliamentarian Forum. And after checking with the Higher Council of Audit about our preparedness to actually implement the SDGs and the 2030 agenda, we kept discussing with the Council in order to better understand the gaps, and therefore we have involved many other parties in our efforts. the agenda is one of the main pillars of our success. We guarantee you that we keep coordinating with the different parties in the society and between the public and private sector and civil society in order to discuss to have legal discussions that may support us and to share experiences and information. I am sorry for interrupting, but if you can possibly be brief and conclude because you don't have much time. Okay, thank you. No, please go on. No, I'm done. Thank you so much for your elaborate and for your thorough details. And this is something that warms our heart. So Maisa is sending me messages to hurry up, but I will neglect them. Dr. Azmi. Thank you. First, I would like to confirm that and affirm that our situation in Palestine is similar to that of Lebanon. They have a parliament but don't have a government. How we have two governments and no parliament at all. The parliamentarians are in a diaspora, so to speak. And as a former parliamentarian, I have worked with other parliamentarians, which or people that I consider parliamentarians, which are the CSOs. In Palestine, not only do we lack information or a database, and which that was revealed clearly by the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is what led us to work that diligently to pressure the government, and we have formed our own miniature parliament and have created networks in order to try to work better on SDGs. However, the first hurdle was the state of emergency that was declared, and therefore we have been a bit hurdled. However, we tried to work as much as possible with the public, with the CSOs to work on the public budget and to increase the transparency. Now, the other problem was that Corona has further marginalized categories. By that, I mean people in rural areas, in remote areas, women, the poor or underprivileged, and that has proven how fragile and ineffective our social security programs were. And that called for a more comprehensive social program and plan, in addition to a health coverage of all the population. For example, we have been lobbying and pressuring for the enactment of a family protection law. This is something we highly stress on. Also, the state of emergency that was declared was accompanied by a number of practices that I deem as a violation of public freedoms, and how some of the officials have actually used this state of emergency in order to get to their own goals. I know that the state of emergency had aimed at protecting the people, but this state of emergency can open the door for many violations. And I think that parliaments must really follow and monitor and oversee all the efforts of the government, because many people have stopped working because of COVID-19. and many strata and many people joined the ranks of the poor. And therefore, social security must be the pillar of all the efforts of the governments, because this is the essence of the SDGs in order to protect the dignity of the people. Thank you so much. And this session could not end or be concluded without a word from Palestine and hearing about the afflictions of the Palestinians. I think that when you're speaking about the state of emergency, I think this is something that is under the power and under the duty of the parliamentarians. Also, you've been speaking about marginalized categories. This is something inescapable or inevitable. Mrs. Maisa has given me 30 minutes more, and I would like to ask Mr. Ali to... Okay, so you have two sentences only, you can say, or 15 seconds. Allow me, Dr. Rami, to raise my voice and to tell the parliamentarians the following. Please, when you have a legislation to see or oversee, ask yourselves, who is going to benefit from that? Who's going to get money out of it? And who is going to pay? Who is going to carry the burden, and who is going to pay? So we've been working with Martin Shangung about streamlining the resources. Please ask yourselves, dear parliamentarians, who is going to carry an extra burden and who is going to pay? Thank you very much. This is an amazing question. So we've started with Mr. Ali, and we're going to conclude with Mr. Ali. And it is true that all the parliamentarians have an important and paramount role in carrying out and in trying to voice the concerns of the populations, and in asking the hard questions that some may escape from because of the political conditions or situation and so on. However, the parliamentarians have this message and this torch to carry. So, and we are, of course, ready to help you and support you in any way we can. I will have to conclude this session and go back to Mrs. Maisa with all my apologies for the time breach. Thank you very much, Mr. Rami, for this amazing facilitating of the sessions. Thank you for all the speakers. Last but not least, and on behalf of all our partners in the organization of this session or forum, allow me to give you not some recommendations, but some pointers that I need to remind you of. There are points that we need to study more, examine more, and that we need to develop more in our efforts to support and enhance the role of parliaments towards achieving the SDGs and toward other goals, of course. I think that the main message was that Corona is not a pretext, but because of Corona, we can no longer neglect or turn a blind eye on the fragility and the inefficacy of many parliaments in dealing with the crisis. Mrs. Maisa, we can't hear you anymore. Can you hear me now? Yes. Excuse me, I don't know what happened. So if the crisis has shed a light on the gaps and the failures of the developmental plan, and sometimes how much there is a power sharing or power competition between the parliaments and the government. However, what we need to do is not focus on now, but rather on the post-pandemic period by setting up our priorities First, focusing on education and health, on human security with its wider range or concept, and also trying to institutionalize the efforts to deal with this fragility. The crisis has also revealed the lack or absence of cooperation between the efforts, and this was shown clearly in the report. Now, the main message says here that parliamentary work through legislation and budget oversight must reflect this comprehensiveness. How can we rethink and re-examine this kind of comprehensive work and cooperation and coordination? Also, we need to focus on the role of the parliamentarians, not only as the voice of the people, but rather we need also to think about the other factors that affect their work, such as wars and conflicts and so on. Parliamentarians may be able to practice a sort of parliamentary diplomacy in order to try to mobilize the efforts, especially when dealing with the donors, with foreign donors. For parliamentarian work, the crisis has shown how important flexibility is regarding plenary sessions and the organization of meetings and so on, and how it is important it is to be flexible with the legislations too, in order to successfully manage this crisis. The other question is that due to the decrease of financial means of many countries now, and because of COVID, I think that we now need some more innovative ideas for oversight and work. Recommendations here in the Arab region. When it comes to recommendation, we keep speaking about how information is not well shared, are not available. So in order to improve the situation, we should enhance the information sharing and availability amongst and between the parliamentarians. And one of the biggest questions would be the pre-planning of crisis management. We have comprehensive work, we have coordination, we have information, we have oversight. However, we cannot give half solutions and half resources to treat this. So how can we strengthen this comprehensiveness in order to find the solution? We are going to work as partners at the ESCWA with the UNDP, with the Islamic Development Bank, and with other partners such as the IPU. We are going to examine our future steps. Thank you so much for your valuable participation, for your enthusiasm, and for the objective and thorough answers. We hope that you are going to go on with your efforts, and we hope that we hope to meet you again in the Arab Forum for sustainable development that is going to take place in Beirut in March 2021, and hopefully we're going to see you face to face. Hopefully. Thank you very much. So there's an intervention from assessment. Okay. We may send you a link for assessment. If you can please fill it out, it is going to help us organize better sessions. We would be grateful for you to that. Thank you very much. Thank you and bye.